Hey guys, Brent Hull Wednesday design video, going back to the basics, a front porch, how to build it. Come join me. Okay, so there's really some blocking and tackling, and a lot of my Wednesday design videos end up talking about styles and different things like that, but there are a number of details that I continue to talk about, and one of them is porches. And porches in particular for this house. This is an historic house in Canada. It's an interesting house. The homeowner thinks that they brought stonemasons over from Scotland to actually put this thing together. The original door is behind that, so that's a storm door on top of this. Reason why it looks kind of new, but there's actually an historic door behind that. So they're in Canada, there's a lot of snow, so they need protection, okay? So what I want to do is I want to look at historic precedent. And because even today, when I start looking at porches and things like that, I forget, okay? And so I have to go back to the past. One of the books I'm going to use is this one called Samuel Chamberlain's New England Doorways. It's a great little book. I wish it was bigger because the examples that I use and find are interesting. Now, here's a quick aside. I've got two. I actually have a number of books that I've got two of, and I'm going to start selling these books on eBay. I'll put a link in the description, but I'm going to take a bunch of my doubles and a bunch of books that I'm always recommending. Get Your House Right, some other books like that, and make them available there so you can go to that. The link will be in the description. Anyway, this is a great book, and one of the fun things that happened is I opened my copy and there's these postcards inside, historic postcards. This is one of them I actually ended up printing out. It's from Marblehead, Mass. And it's a cute little postcard of a great little entry. So what I want to do is I want to look at the past. I want to show you what's happening here, talk about kind of the three ways to build a porch. And remember, the blocking and tackling, guys, is that there's a column with entasis, okay? Entasis, whoever, potato. There is a entablature, okay? Architrave, frieze, and cornice. And what happens today is a lot of people forget about these parts up here in the entablature, and it ends up looking funny. And so if we can remember these pieces, this is why this is a blocking and tackling. If you can remember to put those things together, then you're really building a great porch. So basically what I've done is I've come up with three variations of this thing, okay? So I've got this version right here laid out. I've got a flat version laid out, right, where there is no pediment. And then I've got kind of a pedimented one there with a kind of a full entablature as it wraps around. Now I stayed in the Doric order because the Doric is a simpler order and it's not as fancy and nice. You see the Marblehead one is that in the Ionic order. You can see the scrolls in the capital. It has modillions. It's kind of a little bit more fancy. This one is also in the Doric. You can see the triglyphs here. Something in that realm. And because of this house, because of the nature of this kind of rock rustic house, early settlers house, where we don't need to get real fancy. A Corinthian order would be too much for this thing. But here, as I'm going to do a section, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this porch, and if I drew a line through it, kind of showing you what's going on, there's some important details. Now, typically what's happening is people will get a column, okay? Let's just say that's the capital of my column. And there's, it's a builder column, so it's not right. And there's probably a straight tube, okay, which looks ugly. These proportions are messed up on purpose. And what they do is they build out the beam of their column, and they might do one molding, and then they do they do an equilateral triangle. And the column is up underneath here, up underneath the supporting members, okay? And too often I see the column fitting right up underneath and on the flat part of the underside. Now, historically, the way it was done is that if I had my capital, let's just say I had a pretty capital, and we're staying in the Doric order, I've got the neck of my column, and this one does have an entasis. Okay, this one does kind of get bigger at the bottom than at the top. That's what entasis is. That's how you spell that. That's what that is. Basically, the bottom third of the column is straight, and then it tapers up from there. So, kind of 1/3 is straight, and then it kind of slowly tapers in from that section. it gives it life. It gives the column life. Now what happens is on top of that, you have what's called an architrave. And the architrave is typically made up in kind of 3 steps. And it's the same molding that you have with a door casing. And if I was going to draw it, a door casing, right, you might see a door casing that looks like this. And then there's a bead right here, okay? There's your door casing. That is, and historically was called an architrave because it spans, as arca is chief, beam is trave, and so the chief beam that spans that opening. So the architrave spans this opening between the columns and gives it structural support. On top of that is called the frieze, okay? So if this is the architrave, right on top of it is the frieze. And then on top of the frieze is your cornice, okay? Now that's where our crown moldings and stuff like that go. So there's a bed mold, there's a corona, and then there's the cimation, which is the crown at the top, okay? So that goes up, and I've got an overhang and everything else, and this is where, guys, that gable in return idea comes from, is how all of these pieces come together. But look at the difference between this and this, right? You can see that there is lift, that because there's an entablature in here that has visual lift and it's supported, this looks like it's collapsing, like it's melting on top of the column, versus this one that has lift and it's kind of raised up and it's more elegant. So if we go back to these examples here, right, you can see that this entablature and this section right here really builds this thing up, and so does this here. Imagine if this went right across like that, right? It would look unfinished, right? And so it just wouldn't look as good. So that entablature is really important. And so when we go back to our designs, right, I'm playing with, do we want a full pediment here? Because if we look at this house, we've got probably, if that's a 6/8 door, we've got almost 6 or 7 feet in there. And one of the things they were concerned about is, you know, is the pediment going to get too big up here? And in fact, their initial design was for a flat roof and then trying to figure out how to manage snow loads, but because of this area right here. But because we know that the column is going to sit basically in here, and because my entablature, there's my architrave, there's my frieze, and there's my cornice, goes up like that, I've got plenty of room now. I can put these pieces back in here, and right, it could actually even sit just right on the face of this thing. They had it going out about 7 feet. I'm only going to go out about 4 feet, 3-4 feet. That's what the historic precedent is. That's what we see in a lot of these historic porches, that it goes out, there's a landing or a stoop, but 7 feet's a little bit excessive. And so I realized that in drawing this, that I've got plenty of room for my pediment, right? Because the other thing is that the pediment, this triangular, say, piece, is typically this dimension, that little break is right there, according to the Greeks and Romans, kind of 22.5. Those ones that are equilateral, I don't think they look as good. They look like people didn't understand what their proportions and scale were. And maybe that's why they were worried about getting up too high. But if I keep that classical, you know, proportion, that's about 22.5, that's about 22.5, right? You're seeing that we're used to seeing those visually, and so they work. And so part of this is just playing with historic precedent, right? It's just like that your favorite song on the radio. Yes, it's nostalgic. Yes, you've heard it 1,000 times, but it makes you feel good. I think Peaceful Easy Feeling from the Eagles is I'm not going to sing it. But that is a song I hear over and over again. It's nostalgic. It reminds me, it puts me in a good mood. There's a lot of good things that I remember from that thing. There's no problem with copying the past, guys, because it's a fond memory. It's a beauty thing. You remember seeing it and going, yeah, I really like that. So when I go back in here and fix this column and give it that lift and that height and everything else, I'm looking at this going, yeah, there's a good example. I'm just going to copy that, right? So there's good things that you can do here, looking at the past, looking at the historic precedent. On this house, we're giving them three examples. The pitched pediment makes the most sense because of snow loads, okay? This, I think, works. I mean, those both, that flat one, they look really handsome, they look really pretty. And then, you know, this kind of open one, now you're playing with Do you want something lifted and open? And because what you've done is, the difference between these two guys is that you have taken away material here, right? On this one, sorry. And this one's it's filled in. So this one looks visually stronger. And so maybe on a rock house, this isn't as appropriate because it looks too light and dainty, right? And this one does look better because it's heavier and fuller. So a lot of things to play with, but remember the blocking and tackling. Remember those simple things, copying the past, being okay with nostalgia. It really is the beauty trick that will make this work.